This episode is sponsored by Transcend, a veteran-owned and operated performance optimization company that I introduced recently as a sponsor on this show. Well, since then, I have actually been using my products and I've had incredible success. There was initial blood work that was extremely detailed, and based on that, they offered supplementation. So I began taking DHEA, BPC 157 for inflammation, based on the fact that I've been a stuntman, a martial artist, and a firefighter my whole life. Lots of aches and pains. Dihexa to help cognition after multiple punches to the head and shift work, and peptides. 4 months later, they did a detailed blood work again, and I was actually able to taper off 2 of the peptides because my body had responded so well to just one of them that it was optimized at that point. So I cannot speak highly enough of the immense range of supplementation that they offer, whether it's male health, female health, peptides to boost your own testosterone, which I would argue is needed by a lot of the fire service, or whether it's exogenous testosterone needed, especially after TBIs or advanced age. Now, as I mentioned before, the other side of this company is an altruistic arm called the Transcend Foundation, which is putting veterans and first responders through some of their protocols free of charge. Now, Transcend are also offering you, the audience, 10% off their protocols. And you can find that on jamesgearing.com under the Products tab. And if you want to hear more about Transcend and their story, listen to episode 808 with the founder, Ernie Colling. Or go to transcendcompany.com. Welcome to the Behind the Shield podcast. As always, my name's James Gearing, and this week it is my absolute honor to welcome on the show Ohio firefighter paramedic Patrick Mullen. Now, in this conversation, we discuss a host of topics, from his journey into the fire service, working in a rural department, his experience working the 24/72 shift schedule, mental health, the Save a Warrior program, Brothers Helping Brothers, and so much more. Now, before we get to this incredible conversation, as I say every week, please just take a moment. Go to whichever app you listen to this on, subscribe to the show, leave feedback, and leave a rating. Every single 5-star rating truly does elevate this podcast, therefore making it easier for others to find. And this is a free library of over 1,100 episodes now. So all I ask in return is that you help share these incredible men and women's stories so I can get them to every single person on planet Earth who needs to hear them. So that being said, I introduce to you Patrick Mullen. Enjoy. Well, Patrick, I want to start by saying thank you so much for taking the time and coming on the Behind the Shield podcast today.
Thank you, James. Appreciate it.
So where on planet Earth are we finding you this afternoon?
So today I am actually at home in small town in Ohio called Ann, Ohio, on the west side of the state.
Which is the largest city that people would recognize closest to you?
Closest to me, you have the city of Sydney, which is just south. City of Lima, which is north. So I'm about 45 minutes north of Dayton, Ohio.
Okay. Yeah, so not too far from Jim Bernica then.
Nope, not at all.
Brilliant. All right. Well, then I would love to start at the very beginning of your timeline. So tell me where you were born and tell me a little bit about your family dynamic, what your parents did, how many siblings.
All right. So I was born in Oregon, Ohio, which is a suburb of Toledo. My father was a firefighter, retired as chief officer. My mom was a stay-at-home mother for most of her life. Did a little bit of home daycare. And I have 2 younger sisters, my sister Nicole and Maggie.
Beautiful. What was your experience, or when you reflect back now with 2025 eyes, the pros and the cons of being in the family with a father as a firefighter?
So actually my grandfather was as well. So there was 2 first responders in the family. Kind of goes along the same saying. Looking back, you definitely learn I hate to use the term, but use the workaholic mindset, because everybody has a second job. And looking back, it was great as a kid growing up. You're around fire trucks, you're around other firefighters' families, other families' kids. That part was great, but you definitely learn a different. I hate to use the term family dynamic, but family dynamic when it comes to working and providing, because of the fact that most of us have second jobs.
Was it historically always the case that in Ohio, obviously in this case, that the firefighters were not paid, the kind of wage that alone would sustain a family?
Yes and no. A lot of it's area dependent. The bigger cities seem to have a little bit higher wage in Ohio. Some of your smaller towns and smaller cities were a little bit lower on the scale. Currently, where I sit, we're all right in the middle, roughly, between some of the bigger cities and smaller cities as well. But yeah, for the most part in the state, unless you were in a richer suburb or in a bigger city, you were kind of on that medium to low, right around that $45,000 to $50,000 range, about 20 years ago.
Gotcha. All right. Well, then what about sports and exercise? What were you playing and doing as a kid?
So as a kid, I was a outdoorsy kid, hunting, fishing, played a little bit of everything from t-ball to soccer. Kind of my big thing throughout middle school and high school was wrestling and golf. I know the two exact opposites, but I learned the exercise ethic through wrestling and that kind of determination and hard work. And it's more of that kind of individual but team sport. And then golfing, I loved walking the courses. It was more of a solace game. You kind of just enjoy the round environment and the people you're with.
I ask people a lot of times, what do they pull from the team sports they played and then the individual sports? Obviously, I was a martial artist, so wrestling or taekwondo, you're on the mat, you got an opponent. There's a lot of ownership there. But golf is an interesting one. So when you reflect back now, what were the elements, especially between the 2 years, the application of what you learned in golf to the fire service?
So with golfing, there is a decent amount of skill involved. I mean, anybody can go out and whack a golf ball. Absolutely. I was not the best. I was a upper 80s, mid 90s in high school. Sometimes I would get lucky and get to that low 80s round. But there's definitely a lot of practice, a lot of training involved. I would spend 3 nights a week at the range, 3 to 4 nights a week at practice, and then trying to get as many rounds in as I could. I also, while golfing, caddied at a local country club. So you go in a little bit of work there too. So like when you compare that to firefighting, we're constantly training, we're constantly learning. We're looking at through a different set of eyes. So for me, when I was on the golf course, I was looking for where's the hills, what's the distance, the angles of the green, slope, weather. Was it moist? Was there a lot of moisture on the ground? Then you go in the firefighting, you're looking at whether as a new firefighter, just looking at, okay, I just want to get my first fire. You go through basic training and you're focused on getting your card and then getting a job and getting on that truck, right? For me, that was the majority of my first few years of my career. And then I started realizing, hey, this has a lot to relate with, sports in general. You can start to concentrate more on little areas. Whatever more I could learn, you start deep diving. Spent a lot of time learning about different types of nozzles and how fire stream application works. I spent a lot of time as I developed into a pump operator, learning how pumps worked. And I think a lot of that comes from that kind of individual ability, just kind of dive in and concentrate on what you're working on. And that was kind of the same thing with golf, because it is interesting that when you're on a golf course, you pay attention to everything, whether it's your stance, how your feet are setting, the slope of the green, all that. And that all plays in the same in the fire service. A lot of what we do, it's very situational dependent.
When you look at the sports world, especially when people get to a high level, there's a huge amount of expertise that surrounds the athlete, and sports psychologists and breath work coaches are some of the ones that you see at the top level. And, knowing that golf literally is a game of millimeters, depending on how you're turning the club or your shoulder or whatever it is. I would imagine that as you start climbing that ladder, you're exposed to some of these tools that these top people use. Did you have any kind of exposure to meditation, breath work, some of the things that we know now do work very well in the first responder professions as well?
So back then, no. It was more of a just try to learn how to clear your mind before you hit. Today, I do a lot with meditation, breath work, especially on the golf course and when I'm out there. Same with at work. That kind of calming ability to do, like for me, I do a 20-minute meditation every day. So that meditation at home before I go into work just kind of starts the day off right. And then like on the golf course, I do a little decent amount of breath work. Generally before I hit, I'll just close my eyes and just relax. Take a couple of deep breaths, just relax, and you step up and hit the ball. It really does play a good role, I think, in today's fire service. Meditation, definitely, if you can learn how to clear your mind and keep your mind positive and start, whether it's starting your day, ending your day, whatever it might be, it helps keep that positive mindset and really relieve any stresses that you may have.
Yeah, I found it was inadvertent, but I had a long journey of martial arts prior to the fire service. But when you had those calls that really, had the pucker factor, whether it was a cardiac arrest or whether it was a multiple call structure fire, that just simply, as you said, just taking those few breaths before, in your case, stepping up to the ball or before opening the engine door and getting out and going to work. It's really interesting now seeing that it's not just about mental health that we'll get into in a bit, but it's also about performance. Look at the highest level, performance in sports. They use meditation, they use breath work. So it's not all woo-woo, hippie, PTSD stuff, even though it partly is, there's absolutely an application for the same thing to improve your performance as a firefighter.
Absolutely. And just something as simple as taking a few calming breaths, even before making entry into a house fire, get your heart rate under control. Most of us, even in my career, I still get that jumping heart rate. And if you can just get that heart rate down just a little bit before you go in, your mind's clear, your thinking's better, you're more aware of your environment, and teaching that to our younger firefighters as well, just to, take that step back for just a split second before you go in to kind of get the lay of your environment is really a big helpful thing.
I've said this a few times on here, but it wasn't too long ago that I had this realization that we have one of the only professions on the planet where the only amount of air available to you is strapped to your back. I'd say that, underwater, welders and that kind of thing are the only other ones, or astronauts. So, when you think about that, the fact that there isn't an enforced fitness standard and the fact that breath work and meditation aren't a large part of the conversation, or at least weren't when we got hired, it really is quite mind-blowing, because when you get that heart rate down, I love the CrossFit EMOM, 30 seconds of work, 30 seconds of rest. So, let's say you've climbed a few flights of stairs, you pause on a stairwell, take a moment to get the heart rate down again, and then you continue so you conserve your bottle. But when you really put it into perspective, the only air accessible to us in IDLH is that tank on your back. Why would you not do everything you possibly could to lower your heart rate and lower your respiratory rate?
Absolutely. When I was younger, when I got hired in, there was no physical agility test. It was a high school equivalency test. But I was still, at that time, doing a lot of 5Ks. Generally worked out a decent amount. I wasn't a big guy, but it was more of that younger mindset, physical fitness. All the guys you're working with are about your age, and you kind of just do it all together. As I've gotten older, I'm not much of a runner anymore. I find alternative methods, whether it's walking the golf course, hiking, backpacking, kayaking, different methods to do some cardio as well. And then when I train, a lot of the times when you get to put that mask on, you try to get your heart rate up beforehand. So if we're going to do a training, I'm trying to do something, get my heart rate jolted. And then, so that way you get your mindset going of, oh, my heart rate's up. Now I can take them breaths, calm down, just as if we were going in. And you're absolutely correct. You got 30 to 45 minutes of actual time or, 12 to 15 minutes of work time on a bottle, you want every bit of air you can. And yes, there's breathing techniques out there, but when you get moving, you don't generally think, hey, I need to slow my breathing down. You just continue with that task. So absolutely, holding a decent fitness standard and having a physical agility test is really important to today's fire service. I'm closer to the end of my career than I am in the beginning, and seeing the younger guys and gals that are coming in really good shape. I know a couple of them that do CrossFit on a regular basis, but just having the drive to stay physically fit and knowing that we do a physically demanding job does help, even on the long nights where maybe you only get an hour or a half hour of sleep, but that allows your body to maintain some sort of good ability to respond on calls and stay aware.
Absolutely. Well, you mentioned about, how you entered, but prior to that, when you were in the school age, having this generational firefighter family, were you already dreaming of becoming a firefighter, or was there something else you were thinking about?
So not really. I was like your typical kid. I had different thoughts. Originally I was looking at, believe it or not, being a physician. And then in high school, I was into some of the advanced classes, and I got to a point where I really didn't like advanced math. Calculus stunk. Some of the harder sciences were just not my thing. And I started looking at alternatives. And then obviously being with my father, my grandfather, I got to go on a few calls here or there when my father was off duty, and just kind of watch from a distance. But that kind of really is what finalized the drive to get into the fire service. And of course, I was actually a senior when 9/11 happened. So if I wasn't 100%, I was 100% after that. So that kind of sealed the deal. And then, that the rest is history from there.
You mentioned about going on calls with your father and grandfather. When you reflect back now, and we're going to dive into first responder mental health, with this kind of veteran lens that you have, were there any signs of, either of those two generations concealing some of their own struggles, if any at all?
My grandfather, I didn't notice any. Now, yes, I do notice a little bit with my dad. And the signs I see are, knowing what I know now, are definitely there. And I was almost to that point for a while. I was not doing anything to better myself mentally with what we were seeing. And when I started my career, talking about runs was not a thing. Like you came back and you brushed it off and went to the next call. And that's what I grew up with. That's what I grew up around and seeing a lot of. Never really heard neither my father or my grandfather talk about work much. It was definitely I went to work, I came home environment. Grandpa had been retired for a few years before I was born. So, there was a little bit of a time lapse, but the very few things he talked about were just in some of his old picture albums he had. And other than that, I never heard much. Dad was kind of the same way. I never heard much about days at work, other than a few times I would go, maybe get to go to the station, or a couple of times I had actually got to ride with him on a call. I didn't hear much or got to see that side of it. So it was definitely more of a less talk environment back then.
What year did you get hired?
So I got hired in the fire service in 2005, but actually started 2 years prior in the EMS side as an EMT, then a paramedic, before I got in the fire service.
So let's go to that first, because I want to get your perspective on how competitive it was. But before we even do that, walk me through, you're very young, now you're exposed to the EMS world. What was some of the career calls or impactful moments that you remember from that?
So I worked private EMS my first year and a half or so. So a lot of nursing home calls, a few 911 calls to assist. The Toledo area was a very weird setup with they had a countywide EMS system, but also certain cities and towns had their own EMS. So like you would get dispatched, you'd hear a county life squad get dispatched, to a call, but they could be canceled, especially in the city of Toledo, if it wasn't deemed a true ALS event, and then they would call for a private EMS ambulance. So we were responding on calls with Toledo Fire a lot. And then sometimes in the outlying areas as well. Definitely seen a few calls. Probably the one that sticks with me the most during that time frame was a male that was down. We were actually considered a life squad for the county. We had a dual medic crew that day. We got down there, and it was actually a hypothermic male that was also hypoglycemic at the same time. The nice thing about the Toledo area is you're 3 to 5 minutes from any hospital, but we were able to get him in the truck, start getting him warmed up, get him some dextrose, and then get him to the hospital quickly, which ultimately, turned out for a great outcome.
Beautiful. Well, we basically got hired around the same time. I got hired in 2004. How competitive was it back then? And then compare that to now, if there's been any change.
So back then, it's what I call the post 9/11 era. Especially in the Toledo area, there was not many jobs at all. And they were very competitive for the few there were. The last test I had some knowledge of was 2010. And I think they had close to 5,000 or 6,000 applicants at that time. When I got hired, if I wanted to go anywhere big, the two best options were city of Detroit or outside the state of Ohio. I actually got hired by a smaller city in 2005. And back then there was 60 or so candidates for 2 spots. Today, where I'm currently at in the city I'm currently in now, there's probably, I'm guessing we were like 30 applicants for 4 spots.
Gotcha.
So it's definitely a switch where there's definitely more of a hiring need versus a hiring pool.
Yeah, absolutely. Which again, I mean, I've talked about this many times on here. It's about the kind of person that you get. Firstly, like you said, what is attracting us to the fire service in the first place? So what kind of people are even thinking about this profession, but also then what percentage of that list are you taking versus 10, 15, 20 years ago? It's not just 18 in a heartbeat. Not everyone is the right fit for this job.
Absolutely. I was 21 when I got hired. When I left the department I was at and went to my current department, we had a few guys that were hired in that were in that 18, 19, 20 year range. They were coming out of high school with their certifications, except for their paramedic card. So they'd have their EMT and their Ohio Fire Level 2 right out of high school. So we were getting them straight out of high school. So there's definitely, it's an advantage and a disadvantage. It's an advantage for the cities getting the candidates coming right out of school. To me, there's a lot. I think you've said it, and I know a few others have talked about it. 18-year-old men and women are not, in my eyes, are not 100% ready to see sometimes what we see. You're still developing. You're still young. I started when I was 20-ish, right about 20s when I first got in. And I can tell you that some of the stuff you see, you are not ready to see. And the other downfall is, so with the state of Ohio, when I got hired in, you had to do 25 years of service with a minimum age of 48. Now it's 25 years and a minimum age of 52. So when you're getting hired in, you're working 35 years just to retire.
Yeah. I mean,
34, 35.
Absolutely. And I think, again, it's not even opinions. This is the world of neuroscience. They have said the brain does not stop developing until actually, I think it's mid-20s. So to take a person out of high school, and PD does 21. So we, our brothers in blue, they don't hire 18-year-olds, and I'm sure it's for the same reason. I think that when we go back to this high demand of staffing that we will see when we start changing things, I think you will be able then to say, yeah, at 21 years old, absolutely. We've got some mentor programs, we've got explorers, but yeah, go learn a trade, whatever the other things are. And when you are 21, we'll mentor you up to that point, then absolutely. But I think of some of the first calls I had in my first department, and I was lucky. I think I was 27 when I got hired, if I got that right, 27, 28. So, I my tiny little brain at least had been given a chance to mature. But I can't imagine 18-year-old James seeing some of the stuff that I saw. Would I be able to deal with it back then? I don't know.
Where I currently work, we have a decent amount of part-time staff, and a lot of them are anywhere from 19 to, we'll say 30, somewhere in that range. And part of what I do with the department is the peer support team is, for me, is especially just talk to them. Hey, if you have a bad call, don't just get a hold of somebody, say something to your partner, whatever, talk it out, because knowing that your brain is not ready to see that, and knowing that maybe you don't know how to process that correctly, you want them to be able to at least have the availability, the options to help them, whether it's talking to a coworker or getting them other help if need be to process what they're seeing. But you definitely can see that with our careers, it does take a toll on you over time. And the longer you're in, the younger you are, and the longer you're in, that's going to just compound that even more. I think if I remember the statistic correctly, it's the average person sees 1 to 2 traumatic events in their whole life, and we see 100 times that in our career.
Yeah.
And that's a lot, especially when you're starting at a younger age. I grew up around it, and I still to this day don't think I was ready to see some of the stuff we were seeing, even though I'm sure you felt the same way when you got into the job. It's like, heck yeah, I'm ready to go 100%. You're constantly on, excited. You just don't realize how much it takes on you as a person.
Yeah. I had a really interesting experience not long ago. I've told this story a few times on here, but when I was little, I was in a house fire when I was 4. I had a wall almost kill us when I think I was about 11. Horrible parents' divorce. But like I've said many times on here, equally and oppositely, there were so many healing elements that I think that did a lot of good. But when, I was a son of a vet, so I was around gore and death and all kinds of stuff, but these were obviously in animals. So I had that, and I had a kitchen table. I was one of 5 kids, and, so there was a lot of things that mirrored the fire service. So then, excuse me, you go into the fire service. It's kind of like you said, it's not even so much like anyone told me, oh, we don't talk about it. You just didn't talk about it. You just, you thought this is it. You just go to the call, you close the call, you go eat dinner. This is just the way it works. But when I transitioned out, I worked a code on a plane literally about a year and a half ago now. And, I'm the freaking reaper when it comes to codes. If you're in cardiac arrest and I'm your medic, you are screwed. And so same thing happened, and again, I've said this on here a few times. I keep seeing these stories. Oh, a person had chest pain on plane, and there was a, conference of cardiologists that happened to be returning home. No. I went there, and these poor people, no one had any pre-hospital experience. The stewards and stewardesses were trained in the airway and the AED, and then there's a couple of bystanders that knew CPR. So worked this code. Very long story short, the London Fire came on. We dragged them to the galley, kept working them. Then London Ambulance came on, and then ultimately I stepped away, because I've been on the chest now for a while. And instead of going back to my rig and helping clean up the stretcher and then talking to the doctor about, hey, what do you think? What was the outcome, etc., I just went to the plane bathroom, washed the blood off my hands, and then took a seat. And I had this feeling, and I'm like, what is wrong with me? And then I realized, to your point, it's not what's wrong with me, it's what's right with me. This is how you are supposed to feel when out of nowhere someone has a cardiac arrest and you fight to save that person's life, and then, oh, it happened again, they still die. This is a normal reaction. So we do get so blunted to that how we're supposed to feel gets lost in what people tell us we're supposed to feel.
Absolutely. That whole mindset of we don't talk about it, we're tough, that it was there for a long time. Like this, nobody ever said anything. You would get back, like you said, you'd eat dinner, sit down, go about your day. I think that environment's kind of changing its way, not even so much on the, let's just talk about the call. It's more of a, hey, let's talk about how things went right, how things went wrong. Was there anything we could have done any better? And in the process, while you're doing that, you're actually processing the call. You don't realize it. And that's my take on it, is you don't realize when you're actually doing a debrief with your partner or partners on how you think that call went, or even your crew, is that you're actually processing part of that call as well. we just recently had a code last week, and it just happened to be, we took 3 because she was critical and she coded on us. And when we got done, we talked about it. I'm like, man, I forgot how much fun / how taxing it is to do with 2 people, in the back doing everything with just 2 people.
Mm-hmm.
And it adds that element of a challenge, but also, you have a life in your hands. You got 10-minute transport time. You're trying to give the best outcome you can. You get a heartbeat back, kind of that whole spectrum. And then the patient ultimately dies. But when you talk about it, hey, was there anything we could have done different? Or, what did we do right? Which is usually the high part. What did we do right? What did we do wrong? Or if we did anything wrong, is there anything we could have done different? Meaning, did we get, our time frames could have been better? Could our compressions been better? But I think a lot of it too is technology as well. We were able to get this patient on a Lucas within seconds. So the compressions with devices make things a lot easier. And we had a great positive mindset coming out of it. We talked about the call as a crew. And then, actually got back, and our other 2 people that were on the engine, that crew that had went back to the station, we all talked as a group as well. And, kind of the same debrief. And I think with those debriefings during calls, you tend to off process the information that your body maybe would have hid. And I know for me, talking about it definitely takes that little bit of weight off of your chest and off your shoulders. Whether, in this case, it was a good outcome initially that ultimately, like my patient passed away. But you're able to just process that through.
See, it's interesting because when you talk about that kind of conversation, it requires humility. And I've been on departments that were really good, or crews that were really good at, what went right, what went wrong. And I used to love it because nothing goes right. I mean, I think people think that, when you do these orchestrated hose pulls and ladder throws at the academy, like, oh, this is what the fire is going to be like. No, it's an absolute shit show. You're just hoping that you can whack-a-mole your way into actually all these skills that you learned applying to this organized chaos that is a structure fire. And I wrote about this in, I think, my first book, but like, for example, we went to one house and it was a tweaker house, and the guy had tiled his driveway with slick bathroom tile. So the moment water flowed, every man and his dog was freaking slipping over. Okay, so now you still got to do the same things, but now you got a completely different dynamic. You got the pack rat house example. So learning from each and every one, I think, is really important. And also it then kind of shirks some of the guilt. If you keeping it to yourself, like, oh, I think I didn't push that drug fast enough, or da-da-da-da. When you start critiquing it, you realize, okay, no, we did do as best we could. It was the fact that the person was a quadriplegic for 30 years that meant I couldn't do the compressions, and then you start unpacking that as well. But it takes humility. And if you are an arrogant paramedic or firefighter, you won't have those conversations because you're telling yourself that either A, it was everyone else's fault, or B, that everything just went perfectly. And so when you hear these, oh, well, if no one died, it was a good call, no one got hurt, like, bullshit. Like, how can we make this better? Can we actually, be even better on the compressions? Did you get stuck drawing up that drug? What went wrong? Why was there a vacuum? Whatever the thing is, just so you can next time not repeat the same mistake. And as you mentioned, then the beautiful byproduct is 100% that you are also processing this. The same way as we said, meditation is for mental health and peak performance. It's the same with this. You're improving your skills as a firefighter while simultaneously subconsciously offloading some of the trauma.
Yeah. And it kind of goes back to, I had a friend of mine that I worked with for a long time, and it was a fire instructor for many years. Like I said, learn from every call. Not every good call is going to go your way. Not every call is going to be the same. You'll go on the same situation, but you won't have the same presentation. And if you can have the humility to be able to say, was there anything else we could have done better? That really seems to be that line, like you said, between that arrogant person and not, oh, I'm just 100% great at this versus I just want to improve. And that fine line too, I think plays into as well to the development of you as a firefighter medic and as a person. I know with the crews I work with that we tend to discuss more of, because not all the time do we have the same crew. We have the same full-time crew, but not always the same part-time crew. We tend to have more of them discussions. Is there any, and my favorite one of the day is where are the first in bags going? Because we have a backpack style first in bag, and I like it by the side door. Some people like it on the cot. And just having that moment to say, hey, let's set up for success today, because this is where the equipment will be. It's no different that and with a fire. Hey, you're sitting in this seat today, so your role is this. You're the nozzleman. You're the irons guy. As a pump operator, a lot when I'm on the engine, not only do I have my job to worry about as a pump operator, but also, I'm also assisting with the deployment of a hose line, getting my own water supply. We have second arriving apparatus, but they might be 7-8 minutes away. So I may be in that dual role where I'm doing one thing, but assisting the crew with getting their line in play, getting a second line to the door, whatever it might be, at the same time of, doing my initial job. And just knowing that, whether it's in the fire side or EMS side, knowing that role, but having the discussions as a crew to understand how you want to work your calls as you go on them, just seems to really help. Makes a good positive impact. It gives some direction. And I think especially with the younger people that we're seeing in our job now, that with that giving them that direction, that gives them their sense of purpose to learn and develop, so that next time they come in, the next shift they come in, they're asking that question, hey, am I in this spot today or am I in this spot? And then they start asking, hey, how do you want this set up? Or, if I'm the irons today, do you want me to go straight to the door? Do you want me to take one in with me when we go with on the hose line? They ask the other questions that some of us just do on our own. And I think that really makes for a great crew dynamic as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I remember one of my friends who was a Delta operator said, if you want to see imposter syndrome, go to a Delta team room. Now, these are the most elite soldiers we have, arguably in the military, certainly on land. And you're saying that the imposter syndrome is strong. But I was just thinking when you were talking, it can be perceived as a negative element. But ultimately, if you are a humble first responder, especially if you do fire and EMS, there's such a massive skill set that you've got to be on top of. Looking at it not so much as an imposter and allowing that to come in, but the fear of what if, and I think that's what always kept me going. After 14 years, which isn't long compared to a lot of people's careers, I was still very anxious in a good way about, am I going to evaluate this patient right? Am I going to push the right drugs? Am I going to be able to intubate? Am I going to be able to take the door? All these things. And you go on scene and you're okay. But it's that anxiety that causes you to keep training, to stay fit, to study, to take extra classes. Whereas that arrogance that we see in some people, it's the opposite. And they're walking around and beating their chest and belittling the probies. And then they're the ones usually that, chicken with your head cut off when you're on the fire scene, because you don't have that. So I think that anxiety can be really tempered in a good way and keep you on your toes, because at 30 years old, a 30-year, veteran that's a humble firefighter will still be learning. And if someone can still be the student of 30 years, then you sure as shit better be when you're only 5 years in.
Absolutely. One of my favorite things to see is like the first day of a new firefighter getting on the rig, when they ask the famous question, so what do I do? This is your job. Usually where do we put them? On the nozzle. Your job is to get the line off and the line to the door, bleed the line. You're going to make entry in the nozzle, right?
Don't lose it. Don't give it up.
Yeah, don't lose it. Don't give it up. Sit on it. And then it's usually followed up with like, but I don't want to screw up, or some question along that line. Okay, well then let's go through it. We'll talk about it. If you want to deploy a line, let's deploy a line. We'll talk about it. We'll go through it with you. So if that does happen today, which we know, unless you're in a bigger city nowadays, fires becoming very low. House fires are becoming very low as a event where our EMS calls are through the roof. Training is so important. So now you do get that, maybe we'll say once, and it's 6 times a year you get that fire. So that one on the 6th time, when you show up, you're already comfortable pulling that line and getting it to what you need. They're not worried about, am I going to screw this up, because we've practiced it. And I think building that confidence really does help. And then even, I pull lines all the time when I get the chance to. I don't mind. It's something that we need to do. It's still a diminishing skill. I don't care if you got 30 years on or 1 year on. It's a diminishing skill, like everything else in this job. If you don't start an IV for 6 months, you're probably not going to do a really good job starting IVs for the next few months. So I think that has a lot to do with it, and keeping a positive mindset. And that's really what I like that the department I'm at is everything we do, the chief tries to do is that positive outlook on, oh, you're training? Okay. I've been out training with the crews, and the chief jumps in with the training. He's part of the crew. Put me in. What do you want me to do? What are we doing? That shows the younger personnel that, hey, here's our chief that wants to come out and train with us, wants to be part of it, that, hey, he's not just in the office doing his chief duties. He wants to come out and continue his learning as well.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you look at why we all signed up, like you said, you're post 9/11 generation, so am I, it's because you want to make the world better. And so I would argue that someone who's the right fit to be the chief of a fire department still has that in them, and would want every so often, oh, you're doing a fitness test today? All right, hold my beer. Let's do this. You know what I mean? And like you said, we're throwing ladders. We're flowing. We're, going in the flashover trailer. Yeah, absolutely. I want to come. Obviously you can't do it all the time, but once in a while you'd think that you would. It'd be like, extrication, whatever. And it's funny because I actually remember the last place I worked, I put in for, they did offer some of the educational reimbursement. I put in for VMR, the operational one, and I already had it. And he's like, but the chief I was talking to was like, well, you already have this. Why are you doing it again? And I'm like, well, that fundamentally is the problem with the fire service. You're looking at like a box checking. I'm looking at it as like, I've got, at this point, 13 years in, I want a week of solid tool time so that I can re-up my skills in the next extrication we get. I'm not like trying to remember, because especially as extrication, you don't get cars all the time. It's a skill that is more perishable. So instead I get a full week of cutting and clamshells and tunneling and all the things that we did. And now I'm completely up on it again. And just like you said with pulling hose, is pulling a cross lay hard? No, but it's about reps. It's about, when was the last time you pulled a cross lay? When was the last time someone had spaghettied it when they folded it? And now you have to mitigate that. Those are the things. It's not about knowing how to do it. It's how recently did you do it?
Absolutely. The more time you put in to doing the reps, and whether it's you do it once a shift, some people are out there every shift, want to pull lines every shift. Doesn't have to be every shift, just as long as you're comfortable. I would say we're probably about once to maybe twice a month that we're doing multiple reps with just pulling lines. Then, other days might be maybe we're doing search, or we're going through scene size ups. My one of the favorite things I did was the old front porch, sitting out front in front of the apparatus bay, and telling one of the young guys, hey, that house over there, what do you notice about those windows on the side? And he's looking, and he's like, what do you mean? I said, what's that small one in between the 2 stories? And it just wasn't hitting it. That's an exterior stairwell on the inside of the house. That's the landing. So we went through that rep of, hey, when you pull up on scene as a firefighter, you should still be looking at these houses, because that's your only way up to the 2nd story, unless you're going through a window. And those kind of reps, it could be something as simple as that. Hey, we're just driving down the road today. Let's stop in front of this house. Now, hey, if there was a fire in that window, what would we do? What's our steps? And then that also first goes back to, well, if you're on the ladder today, what's your job at this house? What are you going to do if you have a second story fire? Where's your ladders going to go? Where are you going to throw your first two? You know, that all comes into play, and it doesn't have to be anything big. You know, it can be tabletop, but as long as you're putting yourself through the reps, it seems like the more you do or the more involved you are with doing it, the easier it becomes to recall those little skills that you don't use very often. You know, like you, I would say in the last 2 years, I've pulled tools off a truck on accident twice. Yep. We don't use them that often. So it is very much a diminishing skill. It does come back pretty quickly, but if you don't practice or at least get them out and focus on using them, you know, it makes it that much harder on scene, because something as simple as, is it left or right to open your spreaders, makes a big difference. You know, cutters open, spreaders closed when you get up to a car is important because those are ready to be used. And just getting in that mindset and practicing that really saves time, which in turn saves lives.
Absolutely. Another area when we're on the training topic that came to me, I mean, you can do this absolutely in the fire side too, but especially in EMS, being that black cloud, that grim reaper medic, you know, I have a code save tally of 0 in 14 years, you know, and it's just, I get those calls. I get the brain bleeds. I get the AAAs. I get the, you know, the traumatic arrests and all the things that we just don't come back from, or the diseased heart that refuses to start beating again. Such is life. But what would have been amazing in EMT and, you know, paramedic school, let's say medic school as a mega code, that you work those algorithms and you do the compressions right, you defibrillate right, you give the right meds, and the person doesn't come back. You might even get PEAs, you know, but you don't, you don't actually get the person. They say, good job. Sometimes get a ROSC, beautiful, but in some scenarios, do everything right, get congratulated, and they still die, because that's the real world. And even in the fire scenario, sometimes, I don't know, you know, make the attack and then pull everyone out and say you couldn't get to them. And it's not your fault. Everything that you did was right. Because this do A plus B plus C equals a success. And then, you know, all you see on TV is them holding the baby as they walk out. As we know, it's not like go in there thinking you're already defeated, but understand that if it doesn't have the outcome that you were projecting, that doesn't mean that you didn't do the good job. And there shouldn't be moral injury from the fact that you worked an incredible code and the person still died.
Absolutely. I was a AHA instructor for years on both the ACLS and the PAL side. And most of the scenarios we did, you're absolutely correct. Patient lived. We got pulse back. That was just generally how the scenarios went. But preparing yourself for the fact that these calls aren't going to always go that way. I think in my career, if I know of 2, maybe a third that walked out 100% cognitive after a cardiac arrest as a true save. And those are rare. And if you can put that realism element into the training that you do, absolutely. I laughed because you brought up the backing out. We had recently done what we're calling it a command scenario, along with they were advancing hose line searching at the same time. So they were doing hose line searches, and they picked me to be the battalion car. So I was acting as command officer at, you know, I'm in the station cooking dinner, by the way, and talking on the radio, which is actually 100% realistic. You got 2-3 things going on at once while communicating. And the guys go in, they're talking to me, and I'm doing all the assignments and everything. And I heard one of the guys say, "It's getting really dark and hot in here." And I knew what the guy was about to do to me. I'm like, he's going to call Mayday. I know it's coming, you know? So as I'm getting ready to say, everybody evacuate the structure, we're going defensive, he calls a Mayday. Now what do you do?
Yeah.
And that is the realism of what can happen. I mean, that recently happened in a jurisdiction just north of me where they were upstairs working and had to bail out a window. It happens, and it happens quicker than you think. So for me, it was a great learning tool because I knew I could sense what was coming by how he described it and the conditions. And I'm getting ready to do exactly what I should do, which is this room's about to flash. Let's get everybody out. And he throws a mayday in the mix. Yes, everybody knows it's a training scenario, but now you have to direct the crews to get this firefighter out, reposition hand lines, move other crews into place to try to keep this fire at bay so you can get your crew member out. Yes, it's all fictitious, but that's realistic, 100%. It happens all the time in the American Fire Service. And unfortunately, they're not all good outcomes. And especially when it's one of your brothers or sisters, that's the person that's in there. I mean, that adds another toll. So, yeah, I think you're 100% correct there. Getting yourself ready for that potential, we're not going to get them out scenario, or we're not going to save them, is something that we should be aiming at. Not all calls go 100% the way you want them to. We can't save everybody. You can do 100% great care and they can still have a bad outcome. And unfortunately, that is just the way the world is and the way things work. And we don't have any control over that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, obviously have, a good outcome a lot of the time, but yeah, throw those in unexpectedly so that people have to kind of process that. And so I like that idea of running command while you're making dinner too, because you're not staring at a training building where you're probably not getting the elevated heart rate because you're so detached and you're hearing this. I'm sure it seemed a lot more real than if you were standing in front of a burn building.
Absolutely. So I was in the kitchen. They were out utilizing the gear room and the other bays as their multi-room structure. And they were just training reps, right? Training reps. Hey, we want you to run command so we can talk back and forth, kind of interior to command radio traffic as well. And I'm like, well, hey, just so you guys know, like I did a few from the battalion car beforehand. And then I'm like, hey, I got to go and make dinner. Keep going. Like I'll work through it because I wanted the challenge. Call it multitasking. Multitasking really isn't a thing. It's just our body's ability, our brain's ability to go, hey, I've seen this before. I'm going to continue. I know how this works. And I was just kind of sitting there doing my thing. And even my assistant chief came in and goes, oh, you're training while cooking. That's cool. Like, I'm like, I wanted the challenge of doing it and we need to eat. So the guys out there that we were talking back and forth, they add some realism. Yes, my heart rate wasn't up. But if what I've seen with whether it's my chief running command or whether it's an officer running command out of a car, that ability to be able to step back away from the scene keeps their heart rate low. Now your heart rate's low, you're thinking clear, you're making better judgment decisions. And if we can take that and then put it into the firefighters that are doing the work on the inside that are not the command staff to be able to do the same thing, yeah, your heart rate ain't going to be 60, but let's say we get it to 105 versus 165. Now you're able to make clear judgments, calls. You're thinking clearer. Your senses are heightened more. So, and then you add in the physical fitness side of it where you're not physically tired, where your body's not drained, that those reps add up to leading to a well-polished crew when it comes to working on a scene.
Yeah, that reminds me as well, when I'm in my last department, they were planning a high-rise training and they were doing it in a 2-story building. And I had said, well, how are we going to simulate a 30-story climb prior to this? And he goes, oh, we'll just get you to walk around the building a couple of times first. And I literally probably facepalmed, but I was just like, this is the problem, is that you don't have to create scenarios that are extremely complex and kind of, stump the chump kind of element. But if you are talking about a scenario that would absolutely require exertion, I mean, a high-rise strip is 100 pounds of gear. I back when I was working, I was 168. That's a lot of weight. And now you got to go 30 floors up and then you start working. That's where you can't just be in the burn building. All right, go take the standpipe, on the 2nd floor and then attack it on the 3rd. You've got to do something that's going to simulate what it would take to get all that gear there in the first place and then go to work. And then in the scenario I put together, then we intubated the mannequin at the end. So now you've got a finite skill as well, or fine motor skill, excuse me. So I think this is another area where sometimes you don't have to create like an unwinnable scenario, but are you simulating the physiological response through exertion and or stress that a firefighter would actually encounter on this particular scenario? Or are you dumbing it down so much that they will actually be shocked when they have the real one?
Yeah. And then that scenario I was talking about, that was the last one we did. And I think that was evolution 6 or 7. So by that time, I hate to say those guys, but those guys were getting pretty tired because I was the guy that was running the radio. I had the easy job, 100% the easiest job out there, because I was standing there going like this, holding that mic up to your mouth. And those guys were getting tired. And then had to turn around and they threw the Mayday in. Now we got to go get the firefighter. The funny part is the guy that called the Mayday was the only one that was thinking about calling the Mayday, so nobody else had a clue. So it was realistic. You're physically tired. You're drained. Oh, crap. Now we got to go get our buddy. And yeah, if you're going to, like you said, if you're doing a 30-story high rise, well, you better be climbing stairs, 15 times to simulate that 30 stories. Because you don't know how your body might not know how your body's going to react at 30 stories up by the time you get there. Not to mention, what's your time? Like you, I'm 156 pounds wet on a normal day. Add gear, there's another 80 pounds. Now I had tools, pack, whatever else. Yeah, that would be a lot. We don't have high rises. I got 2, maybe 3-story buildings. I'm okay with that. But even then, 3-story buildings, how are we getting there? What lines are we taking up? Are we taking a standpipe pack and a 3-inch as a supply line or a 2.5 as a supply line? What are we doing to get there? How are we going to stretch it once we do get there? What's our air going to be like? Doing them simulated trainings. If you're going to do a 3-story, and let's say we're going to call it an apartment building, empty out your bay floor. You're talking, we'll say 60 foot wide, create some obstacles, and then go walk, either jog or walk some laps around the station a few times, and then go do the scenario in your gear, then go on air as you're already heavy breathing, and now go do it, because that's what's going to happen as you go up them steps is your heart rate's going to jump, your breathing's going to go up. Now we got to simulate getting that line in place, and it might be a 2.5. Well, how many people does it take to move it to 2.5? You're talking on a 3rd story, 3 people minimum just to move it. How often do we do that? A few times in our career if you're a smaller town, smaller city, maybe a little bit more if you're a bigger city. But that having that mindset of let's create it and make it as realistic as possible, we're not just dragging this line, really is a positive benefit to developing and maintaining the eliteness that you can get in this job.
Absolutely. Well, you mentioned that you transitioned from one department to the other. What was behind the change, and then contrast the 2 departments?
So first department I was at, they're both about the same size, 16 to 18,000 residents between the city and the township that we covered. First department I worked a California swing. So you're day on, day off, day on, day off, day on, and then 4 off for the people that don't know what that is. At the time, I'm like, man, this is way better than a 24 on, 48 off shift schedule, because you got that 4-day window. As I went through my career, you can say certain calls I was on, being in a smaller town, you got to know people. I've been on I had enough calls with people that I knew, whether it was their family, themselves, or the death of a fellow friend that was a firefighter who's I was on that call, that it took a toll. And I give my ex-wife credit to this, because she gave me an ultimatum: get help or I'm gone. And I went through therapy for while continuing to work, but went through therapy, did EMDR for a while, got a little bit better. But ultimately, I ended up not being happy where I was. There was too much bad memories there to where I wasn't happy coming into work, just because of everything that had went on. Ultimately, that led to a divorce. And I think that was kind of the final straw. There was nothing holding me here anymore. A lot of the guys that I knew had either moved on or retired. A lot of the younger, it was a very young department now, other than myself and a couple others. And the department I'm currently at was looking to go from part-time to a full-time department. And they were starting a new shift that I had never heard of at the time, which was a 24/72, which is your favorite shift.
Is it that obvious?
Yes. And I happened to know the chief. I had known him for a few years prior through, fire department, different fire department things that we had done together. And I'm like, man, I would love to go work for him. I'd love to, start something new. It'd be really cool to start a department with a full-time staff. Not many people get to do that. And I was like, man, the schedule would be awesome. And you start doing the math, and without even taking vacation, it was a 21-day difference in a year.
Yeah.
And it's like, man, that's 21 more free days. And at the time, what I didn't know was that, hey, not only is it a 21-day difference, that's one more recovery day. With my schedule, I would come home from shift on my quote in between days, and by the time you never really mentally recovered. It was a little bit of a physical recovery, but you were never 100% there them first 2 off days until you got that 4-day. And even then, that first day on your 4-day was rough, especially if you had a rough night. I have younger kids still, and I'm coming home to a baby at that time. She's now 6, but you're coming home from a baby to up to she was 4 when I made the switch, a 4-year-old. That's a lot. And then you add the stresses of work, family life, relationships not working out. That's a lot of stress. And if you can't have that time to recoup, it really wore on me. Like I said, to the point where I wasn't happy coming to work. And I made that switch, and I started working the new schedule, and I'm like, man, this is really nice. I've had a second job for most of my career. This is the first era of my career where my second job doesn't involve anything with the fire service. A couple of days a week, I do work for a small garage door company, and it's just physical labor, but it's something different and challenging. And it's not a lot of hours, but it's a little bit extra. But what I'm finding is that with my work schedule, if I do have that bad shift, that next day, you have the ability to kind of relax a little bit, offload if you need to. Also, what I did find is I'm driving a half an hour to work back and forth versus 8 minutes. And that half hour is I call it my solace time, whether it's I'm going to work, so I'm leaving the stuff from home at home, getting ready for my day at work, or my offload time coming home. That allows me that little bit of time to just offload anything that I hadn't before I get home, because I usually meditate after I get home from shift, which in turn has really helped me be able to, on that recovery day, to really mind my body. And then also look at myself mentally as far as, how am I feeling? That hard question that nobody really wants to ask. How am I feeling myself? And I am very fortunate that I have many great people in my inner circle. 3 people who I went through Save a Warrior with, as well as 2 fellow firefighters, that they're a couple that Steph, she's like my sister. She's the person that no matter what I can call with anything, and she'll listen. And that having that complete inner circle, just and the extra day off, just makes a huge difference. And the physical wear is less. We still get those shifts where you're up all but a half hour of the night, but knowing, hey, I got an extra day off, when you come home, your body just relaxes. You just kind of get in a nice, easy state versus, I got to go back to work in a day and a half. I got to make the best out of this day. You don't have to now. So that was the transition. And that really was part of the whole overall movement from department to department. And honestly, as much as I love the building I was in and love the people I work with, it was probably one of the better decisions I needed to make. I just didn't know at the time, but that's what needed to happen.
Well, firstly, that's so powerful to hear for a number of reasons. Before I kind of dive into some of them, when you got into the department, what or who was behind the decision to go to 24/72? The reason I asked that, I've had some friends of mine who are doing exactly the same thing, part-time and or volunteer into a career. And I've told them, look, if you are going to do it from scratch, why not do the right shift off the bat? And in one case, my friend, they went to 48/96. And I was like, oh, my God. And now you're locked into that. And now you've got to work away from that. So it sounds like you had some progressive people in this development. So do you know the backstory of why that shift was chosen?
I don't know the full backstory because I don't want to misquote it. But from what I understand is Chief at the time was, we are a small city that's been part-time for years, and before that volunteer. And how can we draw for this initial hiring process, do it through a lateral process, good people with good experience, but also get a decent level in there as well. He also I think understands very well the toll that the job does to you. I think, so how can I get them a benefit without getting them a benefit, right? Like would be the good way to say it. And that was, if we go to the schedule, which at the time, I think there was one other department in Ohio doing it. And now there's 3 that I think that I'm not sure where the idea came from him, but I think at the time he was looking at how can I make this a desirable department to be and get good people, but do the best for my people. And it was weird going through a 4-shift system because you're used to either seeing somebody coming on or seeing somebody going off. There's a whole shift we don't see unless we trade or somebody's filling on the little bit of overtime there is. So it's a really unique dynamic that you don't think about, that every shift has a shift they don't see, but you see them here or there. And I know for me, the few things I've learned is that with our chief currently, he's very pro firefighter dynamic. A lot of the things that we do goes off the inverted pyramid model. So, yes, he is the chief, but a lot of things we do, we're up here. He's down here. How can I make the tips down below? How can I make the environment better for my people? Or how can I, what can I help make easier for people to do, when they come to work? And I think a lot of that positive mindset of putting your people first is what drove the decision. I don't know 100%, but I do know that I think it was the right call. We got good quality people. I love the people I work with. I like the way our shifts fall with our part-timers. They worked every 6th day. So we see the same 2 to 3 people every 12th day. So every 3rd shift for us. And it makes a nice dynamic. You're able to have shifts within a shift, and you know how each other works. You train with each other. You're able, who can cook, who can't, as funny as that sounds. You know that you can send them to the store because they're not going to cook today, like whatever it might be. But it makes it so that you as a firefighter coming in are less stressed. And, for me, I know if I take 1 day off, I have 7 days off at that point before I have to go back into work. That's a big thing for me with having younger kids. So that's a benefit. It's a huge benefit. I get 1 day off. I get 7 days with my kids potentially if I'm going on vacation. Mm-hmm. That's, as a father that wants to be there for their kids, that's a big perk, I guess you could call it. I try to, when I make sure that when I schedule stuff, yes, I might have them at a sitter for a short time, or let's say I'm at my part-time job this day. I try to always make sure I get 1 full day a week or most of a day that I can spend with them doing something, whether we're just at home, we're going somewhere, it could be as simple as a park, swimming, whatever it might be. And I think part of that schedule is driven by that. It's very family oriented as well.
Yeah, I mean, I agree 100%. You probably heard me say that we've always chased dollars and cents, but the ultimate currency is time with our family. And even I've had people recently say, yeah, well, I'm a fan of it, but what about those guys in the stations that hardly ever run? And I'm like, well, firstly, most of them have usually paid their dues in the busy station, and they tend to move, to somewhere quieter, which I think is perfectly acceptable as long as they keep training. You kind of earned that position. But it doesn't matter whether you ran one call or 20 calls, you still were told you can't be with your family for 56 hours. Mm-hmm. So that's what we need to be talking about. Oh, were they running? Doesn't matter. I mean, are they fit? Are they training a lot? That's beautiful. So they're ready, because we all know that those plane crashes or those school shootings normally happen in some really kind of random area that no one was expecting. That's the men and women that you are going to have responding initially to those events. So, don't stop worrying about, are they filling 24 hours full of calls, and just start thinking that, we are the insurance policy, and some of us are used a lot more than others. But ultimately, you are asking these people, you are telling these people, you cannot go home for this amount of time. So why should that be 56 for fire and 40 for admin? So hearing that currency, that like you're talking about, I think is beautiful. You mentioned as well about the part-time job, the garage door job. This is another pushback that I get, which is, again, it nauseates me when someone, like a chief or whoever it is, or a city, manager says, well, if we give them more time off, they'll just work more. Because firstly, you're not in charge of someone on their days off. And secondly, if you're talking about overtime, you're the one that created those holes in the first place. So make the changes that will bring people back into your department, and those overtime vacancies won't be there to work in the first place. But on the other side of the coin, of course, educating people, well, don't work overnight in an ER on your days off. Don't work for a private ambulance company. But I'd love to kind of, dive into that. I worked the same California schedule. Mine was 4 24s, 1 on 1 off, and then we had a 4 or a 6 alternating. And those 24 on 24 hours are brutal, absolutely brutal. So talk to me about, the second job, the importance of it. Are you still at home in the evenings? Are you still sleeping well? Because it's debunking some of the BS arguments I hear that we shouldn't be working on our days off.
Yeah. So for me, it was let's just make a little bit extra money type job. It came back into fruition. Like I always worked, like I said, I always worked second job. My ex-wife was a stay-at-home mom, and I pray her for it. I give her big praise for that. Just, wanted to be home with her kids. And she went back to work. And then as the kids got a little bit older, and then I was kind of more of a stay-at-home parent. Well, when you get divorced, sometimes you got to look at, hey, how can let's better ourselves and better our family. And I'm like, I want to do something. Like I want to make sure I continue with it. I want to have a second job, just a small second income, just something to help put a little buffer, whether it's, if I can build up, let's say $5,000 into a, oh crap account, we'll call it, that my car breaks down, whatever it might be. The money's just sitting there. I don't have to worry about where it's going to come from. Maybe not having to pull out my savings, whatever that might be, that rainy day fund. And I happened to reach out because I still run volunteer with a small department where I live. And I reached out to my volunteer chief. And I was like, man, I'm going to need to get a second job, maybe the first year or two, just to get me through this, that when you're with somebody for 17 years, you get used to a certain, whether it's lifestyle or way of living or whatever you want to call it. And it was like, I need to make sure I land on my feet 100%, but also, I got to get a different rhythm now. It's a whole new rhythm, whole new lifestyle. So, I work 6 to 7 hours, a couple of days a week extra. So, up to 14 hours, maybe 16 hours a week extra. And I do that on purpose. I want at least one free day during the week, and that won't be forever. That's not my end goal with this. It's more of a just giant savings account at this point for me. But I also didn't want to do anything to do with the fire service because I knew what doing fire or EMS related jobs, the extra stress it added to me as well. You're taking what you might see over a career. Now we're timesing it by 1.5, because you're doing extra 24 a week or, maybe 36 hours a week. And, you're just taking chances and adding more in. And I knew what it did to me, and that I didn't want to deal with the extra stress of that, whether it's mental stress or physical stress. And, I got fortunate that he was like, yeah, go talk to, Doug, and he's got, he'll get you right in. He's done it before to help out. And I started working there. He's one of the, at that time he was a captain on my volunteer department. And, because I've always had this sense of serve the community you live in as well. And I've been there now almost 3 years. And it's challenging to say it's just something different. I'm still learning different things each day with it. It doesn't sound like the most enticing thing, but it's like what we do in the fire service is community service, customer service. I mean, everything you do with it's the same notion, just a different form. And, they're not light. So it's a little bit of a workout at the same time. So you're doing a little bit of physical fitness with it as well. And, that was kind of the reason I got into doing that. And, I would say the majority of people that have second jobs generally has some sort of, whether it's profession they did or job they did beforehand, that now they just continue to do that part-time, whether it's construction, lawn care. I know if you guys have rentals, just something along those lines that they do for extra money on the side. You always want to better for yourself and your family. And I think that's kind of the big thing behind it. And that was my drive behind it. 100% was I want to continue to better my family.
See, this is why it's so important to hear. People, some people push against the 24/72 because they don't want to lose the overtime, which again, is extremely selfish if you think about it, because you're saying, let's carry on the ill health in our profession so I can, live above my means, really. And again, I was a single father. I totally get a single income, in that position is really hard. But it's reframing it. Like, no one's saying you can't earn more money. Just stop doing it as a firefighter. If you went into most jobs and they said, well, it's a 40-hour work week, but we expect you to work 80, you would probably turn on your heels and walk back out again. It's the same with this. No one was telling you that there's guaranteed overtime. You're to perform optimally as a firefighter, a 24/72 is it. If you want to choose more and get less recovery, you're opting to be a worse and worse firefighter. It's just hands down, that is it. It's just pure science. But to have a separate side hustle where you enjoy it, you got a different tribe, a different identity. So you're not just all firefighter, and God forbid you get fired, you get hurt, whatever the thing is, or you simply retire. Now you've got that to go into, and then you've also got a financial safety net somewhat for your family. So, if you're all in on the fire service and it goes away, now what have you got? Nothing. So even that conversation is like, we are incredible human beings with this amazing skill set. Think about what else you love doing and go do that. Be an entrepreneur, work for someone that you really enjoy working for, whatever that looks like. But, pushing against really revolutionizing firefighter health because you rely on overtime is the completely wrong, way of thinking about it. You need the money. How else can you earn the money? There's a good chance you're going to find out you earn more doing that than being a firefighter anyway.
Definitely. And, for the ones that do other jobs outside the fire service, you're generally coming home at night.
Yeah.
Exactly. Right around dinner time. So you're getting that family time that you normally wouldn't get. We still have overtime. It happens. I mean, that's normal. In any job you're going to have that's full time, you're going to have overtime, but it's not as much as what you're used to seeing. You might have 12 hours in a 2-week period, and it might be a month and a half before you see another 12-hour shift pop up. We aren't normally not allowed to do more than 36 hours. And, looking at a safety standpoint, you're pushing it. If you were up the night before and you didn't get a chance to lay down during the day at all, because let's say you're out on calls all day, that's a big deal. Our chief is very safety driven, has a safety mindset. And he's like, if you're tired, go lay down. Like, by all means, get that little safety nap in, get yourself, make yourself 100%, or at least as close to 100 as you can get. And I think with, for me, yes, I might work 6-7 extra hours a day, maybe sometimes an 8-hour day, but I have the ability to come home. If my kids are with me, I'm with my kids. And you get that kind of refreshing, hey, at least at my home house. It's not I'm coming off of overtime, coming home, putting my kids in bed, and I'm going to bed. So it's more of a good little mental reset as well. And with our schedule, coming off that swing, if you had a second job, if you did any in between days, you were beat. You would go 3 days without seeing your kid potentially, and that could be with zero overtime, but a second job.
Mm-hmm.
And and I'm a proponent of, that I'm going to provide for my family, but I'm also going to be there for my family. And I think too much, again, my opinion only, is that if you had asked me 10 years ago, what do you do? I've been like, I'm a firefighter, and I introduced myself that way. Now, hi, I'm Patrick, nice to meet you. Oh, hey, what do you do? Oh, I work for the fire service. Oh, okay. It's not what defines me. My job is not what defines me. I define myself. And, that's just a job I do. And I think having that positive mindset towards that way of thinking takes a little bit of the stress off, as well as we're not letting what we do for work define who we are as a person.
Absolutely.
And that creates that kind of positive little note that if you do have that bad shift or that bad call, that you try not to take it personal as much. For us that do it, we've all had it. And you do take a little bit of a personal hit over a bad call, whether you did everything right and then you still have a bad outcome. You take that little bit of hit. Man, I just wish I would have turned out different. Well, we did the best we could. We didn't have a great outcome. That's okay. And just kind of keeping that positive mindset. And that way, I think really that with an extra day to recuperate really seems to make for a more positive environment with better morale.
Well, you talked as well about the 21 extra days. Not only is there that rest and recovery, the extra shift between every 24, but also that's 21 days less that you see trauma each year. And it's not that any of us are running from it, but as I've always said, and this, I was chomping at the bit as a young firefighter, and then I kind of wisened up a bit as I went through. There are no medals for seeing the most shit. There's a lot of calls where, one of the last calls in my second last department, it was a missing homeless woman. We smelt her before we got there. And I told my crew, look, just go back. No one else needs to see this. And I went there, worked the scene. It was grotesque. There was no possibility she was surviving, what I saw. So, right, go back, tell everyone, yep, obvious signs of death, we're done. And they don't have to have that in their little mental Rolodex. And I had the same thing when I was at Anaheim, but in reverse. We were young firefighters. We had a horrendous decapitation of a 3-year-old in a car wreck, and she was entrapped. So we worked the mother who was still alive, and she was transported. And then we went back and did it was supposed to go back and remove the body for the coroner. And my captain and engineer ordered us to stay in the station. And we were all, again, our egos were going crazy. Like, no, we're okay. But he said, look, you're going to see so many horrible things in your life. You do not need to see this. And he was absolutely right. Would we be in okay? Probably. But was it another, drop in that bucket, or however you want to use the analogy, rock in the backpack? Absolutely, it would have been. So 21 shifts less of trauma exposure and 21 shifts more of rest and recovery. When we're talking the mental health equation, that is a huge impact on that conversation.
Absolutely. I had the same situations as you. Literally as a young medic, I had a guy in a suicide be like, just stay in the truck. I'll go in and I'll do what I need to do. You don't need to see that. Vice versa. About a month and a half ago, we had a person down unknown walk in the room. I'm like, you guys just stay at the door. Like, again, same thought. You don't need to see it. It's one less thing. And that, yes, we're taking on an extra burden by being the person that says that, because now we're seeing it, but we've seen it before. This is one where maybe we've seen it before, and you're like, okay. And then you have the ability to self-reflect and look and go, did it affect me? Did it bother me? Or we have that out to talk to somebody like, hey, we had this, this deceased person today. This is what it was. They were down for at least a day. It wasn't the best thing. I just need to get that off my chest.
Well, we also had the capacity to see one more person because someone told us not to see that person. You see what I'm saying? So we didn't see all the things as young people and then all the things as older. We were under good leaders that told us not to go and see certain things. And I think that gave us more latitude to then be the person that does see them and tell the next young person not to.
Absolutely. There's been a few times I can think of over my career where I'm glad I didn't have to see some things. And I've heard stories about other calls that, I was glad I wasn't on. And that's been recently where I was like, man, if I was actually working today, like that would have been really bad. And knowing how I would react because it would trigger something. And so, yes, on both sides, it's a good and bad thing. Now know your limits, but you also have the ability, the capacity to take one more because there was, like you said, because there was one less. And then you're teaching the younger generation, it's okay as you get older to take one more because you took one less.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that it definitely teaches that right progressional, I guess we could call it progressional mindset of, help them out when they're younger so that when they're older, they have that capacity.
Yeah. And teach them it's okay to just not see. If you don't need to be in there, you don't need to see it. These guys, I mean, sadly, luckily I haven't been around many people like this, but, the ones that take pictures at car wrecks and all those kind of things, like it's a badge of honor to be able to see it. Like, no, I guarantee you're going to be the one that's really going to be hurting in a few years because, if you feel you need to validate your own ego by walking around telling everyone how horrific the call was, it's probably an indication that you actually are starting to struggle. So I think it takes a grounded, humble, young firefighter to listen to an experienced medic and go, okay, I trust you. I won't see that. Thank you. And then, like you said, fast forward 10 years, now you're that medic shielding other young people from it.
Yeah. The ability to teach without teaching, right? You could call it. You're teaching them how to maybe take something away from them having to be seen, but also that later in your career, hey, you might have this happen again. Pass it on, pass it forward. Then we do that in all different forms, whether it is a deceased person, it's that bad call, but also there's the old adage of, hey, this is a crime scene until proven otherwise. So now you're actually doing two jobs. You're preserving the scene. You're not, the detectives can come in and do their thing. Law enforcement can handle their side of it. And there wasn't a whole bunch of extra personnel in there as well. And if it unfortunately was something bad, they don't have to deal with getting drug in the court over it.
Yeah.
So you kind of take on that responsibility when you do that, but you're also in turn helping them physically and mentally by not overloading that container. You're not, because we can only take so much, and for everybody that's different. I've seen where the first traumatic call a person was on, they were done. That was all it took. I can't do this. To where you get, we call them the old salty dogs, the guys that back in the day that could see whatever and just walk away like nothing was wrong for their whole life and just held it in. You see both sides of it, and then anything in between. I have definitely learned that passing on the knowledge you've learned about self-care, especially after calls, is way more important than trying to be tough or look tough. It isn't. And asking for help or asking just to talk to somebody is okay. Yeah. And that's the important thing, is getting the information out there to teach the younger firefighters, the younger medics, even young cops, the same thing of, it's okay to talk to somebody about what you see because it's going to help you in the long run.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, going back to the actual shift pattern, when you need to work on overtime or when you're doing a time trade, for example, or a shift swap, when I think about the old California one, a lot of times that pretty much guaranteed either a 48 or even a 72. With the 24/72, I can see how there's a potential where you would go off for one shift and then come on to work that trade or that overtime and then be off again. So you don't have to actually do a 48 anymore. Is that the case?
It just depends on who you trade with, and how the overtime would fall. But yes, there is that chance that you could be off a shift and back on. But the positive side of that is even though 2 days later after that shift you're back on, is then you still have 3 days off after that.
Yeah.
So you get both sides. Yes, I might have to work an extra day this month or an extra shift or whatever. It might be half a shift, but I still have that ability to come off shift then after my next normal shift and have my total time off. So even though you did pick up a shift or work a shift or trade a shift, you still have, the few extra days a month to recover. And that truly is a positive side of that rotation is, like the 36-hour time limit with overtime. Like once you're there, you're done. You shouldn't work over 36 or, hey, if you worked an overtime shift in this 2 weeks, maybe you shouldn't pick up another one. Just have the ability to somebody tell you, hey, hard stop, no, or, hey, you probably shouldn't work that. Like we have a rotational list. So I can't pick up today and then 3 days from now, pick up another one. There's somebody in there that's going to pick up, it's going to be ahead of me, which forces me to step back. And I think things like that protects us from ourselves. Because I do love my job. I love the people I work with. So, I get to go in, I could go into work an extra day. That's all fine and dandy. But what's that toll take on me? So it's a double-edged sword when you look at the amount of ability we have to go in to do our job versus what's really good for us.
Yeah, 100%. One more question before we go to mental health and Save a Warrior. When I think about the 24/48, obviously you've got, let's say your A shift, then, C shift has just left, B shift is coming on tomorrow morning. And, I think of some of the shift wars and tensions. Now you put an extra shift in between where it's not maybe directly, the shift before, the shift after. What impact does that have, if any at all, on the tension between the shifts, which I know is usually the quiet stations, the busy ones just get on with their job. But have you noticed any difference between, previous tensions of shifts, aka shift wars, and the 24/72?
No real shift wars. Everybody, you're going to have tension. It doesn't matter. Sometimes, a lot of times you'll have fun. We'll see some. So for me, I'm shift 3. So I don't ever see shift 1. I just don't see them unless I pick up overtime or one of us works a trade. And, not really tension. There's definitely your morning. Sometimes you'll have your morning struggles, maybe a rig got left low on fuel. Now I got to go fuel it. It happens. You'll have that happen, but generally it's still like the old 24/48 adage. It's a shift before, a shift after. It's never that oddball shift. I always laugh because I'll joke around that, let's say I left, let's say a small jug of orange juice in the fridge. Well, we share a fridge with shift 1. Now my orange juice is gone. Well, who took it? It's fun banner. Nobody really takes that to heart, but I don't think there's as much of that shift war going on because everybody has a shift they don't see. So I think that promotes, and then promoting a good positive environment as our chief does. I don't think you have that much. I think things get worked out on their own a lot easier. The ability to be like, hey, making up a name, Charles, dude, last shift you forgot to fuel the medic before you left, on your last call. Can you help me out next time so I don't have to do it when I come into work? Yeah, no problem. I think that it alleviates some of that tension between the shifts because you have now that more open dialogue to be able to just talk to each other. It's not always, you don't get that stereotype that, It's B shift that always does the bad shift, or C shifts the clowns, or A shifts the strict guys. You just don't get that back and forth.
Well, I would imagine as well, with just a more rested department that is not being forced and or volunteering to fill immense amounts of overtime and gets an extra shift between shifts, that you probably just have a better environment because everyone's coming in less burnt out and more rested.
Definitely. It seems like that the extra rest gives you a different mindset as well. I know for me that does, that if I can get in my own bed for 3 nights, I'm a lot better than if I'm in my own bed for 2. Because usually what I'm finding out is that I've been watching my sleep patterns, and the first night home, I sleep at about 50%. And then I get 75 and then 90, 95% by the end before I go in the shift. And I also tend to trend towards getting to bed earlier by my 3rd off day. You can kind of trend yourself down to where now I might not get a full 8, but I'm at least at 7. I think that having that extra day, especially with tracking my sleep, that I've noticed it to where at work, I don't sleep well. I think it's just a fact of years of running calls in the middle of the night. My body's just entrained that when you're in a building that is a fire station, you're going to get toned out. So you don't fully fall asleep. I know the nights I do because I can't see straight for the first 30 seconds I'm awake. It doesn't happen often. And I know that when I get home the next day, that usually it's not as sound of a sleep as my normal sleep, but I'm better because your body's still kind of just readjusting to the environment you're in. And then usually by day 3 of being off, that, like I said, I'm about 90% heavy sleep pattern, and I'm fully refreshed going into my shift.
I never thought about the perspective that you just gave on the quality of sleep in the station. I've talked about many, many times that we never get into deep sleep, and it's understandable because I say you're waiting to get woken up. But if you think about conditioning, learning, if over and over again you say the moment you wake up, in your case, you've got to run to the driver's seat of a rig and navigate code 3 and then, maybe put up the aerial or whatever the next job is. From a dead sleep within, we're not exaggerating when we say 60, 90 seconds. When we look at our, bed to door time, that's supposed to be what we're doing, or the firefighters bunkering up and thinking about, right, okay, person's in trap. What am I going to do? Where's the ladder, et cetera, et cetera. If you do that over and over again, and obviously there's varying degrees of stress. Now it's a, tummy ache times 4 days. So, you've got through the roof and then you're like, oh, it's only this. Of course, you're not going to have a good quality of sleep because your body is going to learn, or your brain is going to learn, look, don't go to sleep fully because we can't afford to be cross-eyed for 30 seconds when we wake up. I need you to wake up and then, shake your head and now start driving through, traffic. So, it makes sense on so many different levels. But even that, there's a learning to not sleep deeply on top of the stress factor, because how many other professions aside from someone in a garrison somewhere that gets attacked goes from a dead sleep to operating at possibly 100% within a few seconds? So again, what we are asking our first responders to do is such an anomaly, and yet we work them 16 hours more than the person in the bank. It's so backwards. So at least getting this extra 24 so that you can recover from that arguably sleepless or very, very sleep disturbed sleep, even if you didn't run a lot of calls in the night that night, that 72 hours, and you're speaking about observationally now, and there's a Swedish study that showed it, from a data point of view. Of course it makes perfect sense, because you're never, ever going to get a truly good night's sleep in a fire station.
I know that. So last night I came off shift this morning. I will be honest, I didn't run a call all night. We did not have a call all night long, which is rare for us. And I slept crappy. Probably woke up 4 times. I think I've seen it myself And we're going this route next with our conversation, but looking into the mental health side of things, I was like, man, I read the sleep study you were talking about, the SWEDIS study, and I'm like, there really isn't much out there that really gives us good data on it. There's just, it's hard viewpoints. And I'm like, I'm gonna make myself a spreadsheet. So I made myself a spreadsheet, and different data points of how many calls did you have, what apparatus were you on, how was it, a work day or is it at home? How many hours did you sleep? Was it broken? And then at the same time, like, man, I bet some of my friends would do this with me that I work, no. So I'm like, I posted on Facebook. I'm like, hey, anybody want to help me this? I'm going to do a amateur sleep study. If you have a watch that can track your sleep, that's all I'm looking for, is a way to track it. And I'm still getting sheets in, but there was 6 people total, if you count myself, a 40-hour shift, a 24-72, 24-48, a Cali swing. And then I actually have a buddy that's at Charleston, South Carolina. I've known him since I was a kid, and they're getting to do their own version of a different shift. And so he's doing a couple months of it for me. And then eventually I'll compute all the data and figure out, is it just me? Which I'm going to find out probably not, but look at, how is it when we're coming off duty versus how's our first night at home? Did we get 8 hours when we tried? Was it broken? Is it because we're going on calls in the middle of the night that we get, you get in tune to just going on calls all the time. Your body just gets used to it. Like I said, I don't sleep good at the station because I don't sleep heavy. And there's nights that I'll wake off before the actual tone. I'll wake up before the tone goes off because the light comes on first. The red light comes on in our bunk rooms. I'll wake up to the light and then the tones go off. And why is that? It's because I'm not sleeping heavy. My body senses a change and it wakes up. So I think that having that extra day, like I said, I start trending upward with my sleep pattern, allows me to physically and mentally recover before my next shift. And yes, there's going to be days where you work a shift overnight. It is what it is. You just have to have that ability to know that maybe if you're going to work that overtime shift, that the next day you got to dedicate 4 or 5 hours that next morning to taking a nap or getting some extra sleep or some sort of self-care that makes up a little bit for that day you missed.
Absolutely.
And that definitely takes some commitment to understanding that.
Well, you mentioned the line of duty death, and I'm not saying this is a factor in it, but I mean, I'm sure that had an impact in itself. I don't know if you want to elaborate on that specifically, but also kind of walk me through how you got to your lowest place, and then what were the unique toolbox, tools that you accumulated yourself to get that post-traumatic growth on the other side.
So it wasn't actually a line of duty death. It was a fellow firefighter that was in a automobile accident involving a semi. But over my career, I've been on multiple cardiac arrests, like, most of us have. And I did notice that when, especially my son was younger, is when them started hitting. So now I'm associating them with my own kid that has nothing to do with it. It's just, that's how you're associating a small child with a small child. That's your child. And growing up, not talking about it, I would come home and be like, hey, I had a bad shift today, just so you know, I had a bad shift last night. Never said a word to anybody. I had another shift that kind of started me down the bad trail that a close friend of mine, child had a SIDS episode. And I, at that time, lived close to the station. I came in to help cover the station because everybody that was working was on the call. And we did call back to keep some sort of minimum standing or standard of people at the station to help keep the city covered, especially an incident like that, because we were a small city. And I ended up going on the call as a medic because they needed another paramedic. So now I'm working my buddy's kid who I grew up with, he grew up with me knowing him, I should say. So I've known this kid since birth. He's 7-8 months old, and I'm the one doing CPR. So that kind of started, that went from, okay, now I got some pediatric cardiac arrest to Now I'm working on a kid I know. Well, my buddy had started to have mental health issues of his own. And another time, I'm the medic that's on the medic unit, and he had a suicide attempt. So I end up taking off and spending multiple hours with him at the hospital, talking to him. And this went on. I mean, I worked with him over a year trying to just keep him going, and he ended up ultimately taking his life. So there's one more thing that added to that giant pile, and I don't know that my ex-wife knew how many phone calls I took and talked and the amount of time I spent. And neither did my coworkers. Nobody knew any of this stuff. We held it in. And then came Ben's accident. I was the officer in charge of the engine that day as a senior firefighter, and show up. We know it's an overturned semi. Get the driver out, crawl into the passenger seat, reach in, passenger's deceased. Okay, no, something not like the first time I've seen this before. As we're standing there, we find out it was Ben. Ben was a son of a retiree from the department, or grandson of a retiree from the department, son of at the time, an auxiliary firefighter, or basically what you would consider like a paid volunteer. Mm-hmm. And Ben was also on auxiliary at one point, and I taught with him. So we were pretty close friends. And living with, meaning the thoughts of being the one to pronounce him and not ever getting that, how do I want to say this? Not ever letting myself feel that and be vulnerable enough to share that with somebody and get the right help to work through that problem ultimately led to isolation, being angry all the time. Eventually, like I told you at the beginning, I basically had an ultimatum of get help. And, that led to a PTSD diagnosis, which during treatment led to anxiety, depression that popped up while going through EMDR treatment. And I live with that still now, but I don't have the reoccurring symptoms. Anxiety from time to time, but I have the ability now to go, hey, if I feel it pop up, I got to go talk to somebody and get this, whatever caused this, figured out and worked out. And unfortunately, when you work in a small town or a small city, you're going to have them calls where you run on people and unfortunately for me, 2 out of the 3 calls I was on duty or working for, and just never said anything to anybody.
So where was the lowest place that you found yourself? You're getting this repeat hits. I mean, I can't imagine. This is the one thing I never had to endure. I never worked in the city that I lived in. I always, a lot of times was like 70 miles away. So I was very detached. Mm-hmm. So, you're getting these multiple assaults now emotionally. Where was the lowest point? And then, what was that kind of corner for you? How were you able to start climbing yourself out again?
So, I'm thought I was working through stuff very well. And then our divorce happened. It is what it is. I don't hold anything against her. We get along great now. And that's the plus. We're doing the best for our kids. But that was kind of that last kind of breaking point. Never went down the roads of being suicidal, never had any thoughts, but definitely got to a deep depression and anxiety state where it was constantly one after another. Talk about the fight or flight mechanism kicking in. At that time I was 39. Now I'm going to be a single dad. I got younger kids. What am I going to do? And all these thoughts start creeping in. And it was just a very low point, very kind of low, even though I had a great support system, it was a very low point, isolating point for me. And I started to isolate more. Just kind of didn't go out with people, didn't do things for myself. Very much just rotate nothing but around my kids, or I would just kind of stay inside, stay away from things, never did things I liked. And it wasn't until I finally made that decision when I seen the hiring process. I've got to make something change. That I've got to do something different. I'm not happy with my life where I'm at and what's going on. That really didn't have a change. When I got the letter saying, we want to hire you, that was kind of that change, that upswing that started. I call it the Facebook notice about the hiring process was the little voice from above saying, hey, you better look into this. And then from that point on, it's just slowly been an incline instead of a decline. Nothing works fast. I got hired in there. I got on a shift with my current captain as a big tech rescue guy, and I like that stuff. So we all meshed really well together really quickly. And I was like, man, I really, I went through all this. I started to get help again. And I'm like, man, I really want to be able to look at the peer support side. Like, it just, something drove me to that. So I went and got the training. And I was at my probationary evaluation, and my chief asked me, he goes, what drove you to peer support? I see you got really kind of passionate for it. What drove you there? And I kind of just gave him a glimpse. And he was like, holy cow, I never knew that. And he's like, and that's where Save a Warrior came in. He's like, have you ever heard of this? If you want information, reach out to these two guys, one of which I knew for years. I'm talking a guy I knew for almost 20 years had went through the program. And when I got a guy I look up to, who's been a mentor now, that has nothing but positive influence, for the last 6 months at this point, going, look into this. I got a computer right away and looked into it. And I literally submitted an application that day. And it was probably the coolest moment after my rostering call when I got to come back to work the next shift and walk in the chief's office, tapped on the door and said, hey, chief, got something to tell you. And he's like, what? And I told him. He's like, that's awesome. And that was really the upswinging point where that kind of hill started to go really at that nice steep incline in my life as far as positive outcomes. And ever since then, it's just been living the life that I never knew I could live, with a different mindset than I ever knew I could have. And finding out that it wasn't just work, some stuff from childhood got brought back up. It is what it is. I was, for a while I was bullied in school and never thought anything of it. It led to a lot of my actions, the way I perceived myself or presented myself or try to fit in, which ultimately led me down a path that, again, learning not to talk to somebody about the bad stuff we see. Well, that's a pride thing. I didn't need to have pride. I need to look out for myself. And, this is my story that I just shared, is something I will share with anybody that asks. And I'm not ashamed of it. It's something I went through. I continue to do work every day. It's not easy. I still have bad days, but I know how to handle them, and I have the resources to handle them. I have the phone numbers to handle them. And that's the key for me is knowing that, continuing a daily pattern. Each day is the same but different, that I have a routine every day that helps promote positively every day. And staying positive no matter what the day brings you really just changes your whole outlook on everything you do. From hating going to work to now I go in excited. That's huge. And that for me was kind of the whole story of how things, went through. I'm sure I've missed a few events in there. Like I said, my box was more than full. It was overflowing. And I just finally had a breaking point of I've got to do something different. That was my breaking point. My body physically said, you've got to do something different. So it took that and kind of a little bit of courage to be like, I'm going to leave this place after 18 and a half years. on the back to probation. What the heck? Why not? And it was the best decision I've ever made.
Well, a couple of things. Firstly, and I've made this observation a lot recently. Actually, was talking to the Florida professional firefighter. What are they? Yeah, Florida professional firefighters at their conference. And I was saying, if you are beating the chest about cancer prevention and you're not talking about shifts and sleep deprivation, then you're not taking cancer prevention seriously. If you're beating your chest about mental health and you're talking about it's what we see and you're not talking about shifts and sleep deprivation, then you really are, you don't care, because it's in the room. It's not a elephant, it's a herd of elephants, but you guys will not acknowledge it. Sleep deprivation or shift work, excuse me, the same thing, is a known carcinogen. There is a direct correlation between sleep deprivation and all things mental ill health. And then also going to the childhood trauma. Where's the conversation that a lot of us, because we chose this profession, usually are going to have some shit when we were young, and we don't talk about it at the front door. We just do some bullshit psych test that actually was never meant to be a standalone test to determine if someone's right to be a first responder. We check a box and we're like, come on in. So, if listening to your testimony, having the courage to leave a department after 18 years, predominantly for a better working environment, I mean, that speaks volumes, because it worked, along with other things, Save a Warrior, but it worked. The rest, the recovery, the time. And then, I went through a divorce as well. I think we were literally the same age. And then you have that whole thing about, oh my God, I'm 37, 38, and now I'm dating. And this is awful. All the guys, the old guys that thought they were Adonis that would talk about getting strange. I'm like, no, this is horrible. I don't want to be. I enjoyed being with someone before, and ultimately I found that person again. But all these elements just show how powerful this conversation is. And then going to Save a Warrior, that there are organizations. When I talk about this toolbox, usually it's counseling and it's psych meds, and then maybe EMDR is in that conversation. But no one's talking about Save a Warrior or ayahuasca or equine therapy or dive retreats, or there's so many things there. So the fact that you had the courage and the humility to say, this isn't working, my kids are the most important things to me, which is exactly what happened to me. I'm going to go to a place that is going to be a healing environment. And then I'm also going to try Save a Warrior, which I've seen and has amazing results, but I know it's going to be tough because I am going to be taking deep dives into my own background. I think there's so much power in all the things that you've said.
Yeah. So I went to Save a Warrior in August of last year. Believe it or not, on my birthday. It was my first day at cohort. And to this day, on my wall to my right, Jay Clark, who you've had on the show before, I have a partial saying from that first day. And I've left some of the words out, but it says it's not going to go your way. And I put that up there for a reason, because nothing's going to go your way 100% of the time. You're always going to have things that just don't go how you want them to. And it's my daily reminder when I wake up at home that, hey, this day might not go the right way, but let's make the best of it. Save a Warrior taught me a lot of things. When Dr. Clark founded it in 2012, he was looking strictly at veterans. I mean, you're talking an organization that was trying, as a veteran myself, trying to do better for veterans coming out. And it ultimately morphed from Malibu, California to Hillsborough, Ohio now, which is 2 hours from me. And it encompasses, for the state of Ohio first responders, it's 100% free. At least from the fire side, I know 100% for sure, because our state local covers that. That's part of our dues.
I didn't know that. Thank you.
It's for mental health. The OAPFF, I think it's $5 out of each month's dues go towards firefighter health and safety, so I was able to go 100%. Didn't cost a dime for me to go. And in 72 hours of hard work and a whole lot of being vulnerable in front of other people, you start to heal. And when you come out, from the time you start to when you come out, you start a 500-day program. And if you stick with it, the results are amazing. I'm to the point now where I'm actually starting to go back and help others. Since we last talked on the phone, I've been asked to do a classroom lead role, because before, when you came out of cohort, you had travelers and it was all by phone. Our cohort, and for those of you that don't know what a cohort is, our cohort is the group that we go through with at Save a Warrior at that select time. So like our class. So when we came out, we started using Google Classroom. So now I have the ability to be a lead in the classroom, and then we'll actually get to go back. So doing the work, traveling, helping other class cohorts that come out. And then, I will also be going back in September as a shepherd to help another cohort in person. And it's that work, I think, that helps my healing the most, is by helping others. And meaning that we're going back for others. I'm not there to be your rescuer. I'm there to guide you. And we call it wounded healing. We're wounded healers. We have our own stuff. We work through it every day. Not all days are great, but it gives us a sense of purpose and drive. That's something that defines us. I know for me that I came out on such an emotional high that I was like, man, if this ends, I don't know what's going to happen. Like, I don't know. You let off so much crap while you're there that I remember showing up to my daughter's softball game and her just seeing me smiling, like, are you okay? Like, yeah, I'm fine. I was shaking. I was so excited. And that hadn't happened before. I've never been, I was never that excited. I was almost anxious, excited. And yes, not all days are good since then. You get that it's a roller coaster, right? We come out, you're feeling really great. And then eventually you're going to start taxiing down, then you work back up. But things I learned there, were maybe just having a routine. We started off every day with routine while we were there. It wasn't all the same, but it was within the same time frame. And for me, that is I get up every morning. First thing I do is I make my bed. Why? Because Admiral McCraven said, make your bed. Start the day off positive. I love that book, and I will, I quote that to people all the time. It's like, read that book, understand things. But that's of doing one task to start my day off right, And as silly as it sounds, I walk in the bathroom next and I say, I love you in the mirror. And I walk back in and I do my meditation. 3 positive things to start my day off. And after that, the day can go haywire and it doesn't matter. And if you want a 4th positive, is being home, waking up my kids, or seeing my kids wake up, that's a 4th positive. But it's learning to take the negatives with a grain of salt, or reaching out to somebody to talk to about the bad days. We call it the 1,000-pound weight. It's that phone. It's that, that half-pound iPhone we carry, or whatever it might be, just to pick up the phone and call somebody. And I'm fortunate that I have 3 brothers from my cohort within an hour and a half from me. And we get together all the time. We talk 4 or 5 times a week. And having that ability to be able to share unshareable things, or things you wouldn't tell others, or maybe you wouldn't tell, say it was that bad call and you had to see somebody that you can't get out of your head. Maybe just sharing it is all I need. Hey, I need you to listen for me. I got to get this off my chest. If you want to help me dive into it, go ahead. And that's an outlook I never had before Save a Warrior. I would never have thought about it. And that program for me has been huge. Seeing the change in others, where I'm at now with helping the program, as well as still continue to do the work. It's pretty cool. I don't know how to explain it, other than there's a certain point you get when you become what we call a traveler, and that you get to a point where now you get to see others complete stuff, and you just get this warm feeling like, holy crap, I'm super excited. Like, that was awesome. And there's no other way to explain it. It's like watching your kid be born. It's that same kind of sense of feeling, that sense of completeness. And it's a whole different mindset. I'm learning to confront things. I've learned to handle situations differently. It's still a fight some days to keep the little voices that say, protect yourself, potentially blowing up on somebody versus take that deep breath, think about what you're going to say before you say it, or do I even need to say anything right now? And then either walking away or calmly handling that situation. And that's kind of where I'm at. And it's just it's a cool emotional roller coaster that keeps you smiling every day.
So this is where I think, the conversation needs to be now, that the hope of post-traumatic growth, the hope that you can be an even better version of yourself. And it was funny when you were talking about the quote from Saw years ago. There was a poster on a wall in a CrossFit gym, and it just said, "It never gets easier." And the point is that you get fitter, you get stronger, you get faster, but you're still pushing. And I think it's the same with this conversation. It's not that you're going to come out the other end and all of a sudden it's like a Disney film. There's still going to be the great, great days and the shitty days, but your ability to process them and cope with them and be empathetic in all these other areas are just going to be so much better when you've done the work. So hearing testimonies like yours and so many others, and again, these people have gone through so many different modalities. Everyone's story is different. But I've heard a lot of amazing Save a Warrior success stories. But when people hear that, they're like, Patrick's not saying, oh, I get up every day and I'm still depressed, but, I'm getting through it now. I'm not killing myself. It's not. It's like, here's where I am now, and it's even better. Even with the department, I moved for these hours and it's even better. And this is what I think people need to hear. And this is what I think will drive people, whether it's to go to some sort of mental health modality. And I know in your state, I think it's Wave Neuro, if I've got that right, the TMS, you guys have free access to that, as we do here in Florida.
The ETEMS.
Yeah. So all those ones, are available, but also have hope to believe like, well, if we actually change our work schedule, that will also have a huge impact in everything from our physical and mental health to our relationships and our marriages even. So it's so great to hear, you kind of shouting from the rooftops now. Now, you mentioned Make Your Bed. I wanted to transition to some closing questions so I can be mindful of your time. Are there any other books that you love to recommend? It can be related to our discussion today or completely unrelated.
So probably one of my favorite books, and I got to meet him in San Francisco finally, was The Mission of Men and Me by Pete Blabber, who was a colonel in the Special Forces. Learning that, but for me, it's not just, it used to be the mission of the fire service. Now it's, what's my mission? And the men, that goes out the window. The men are my kids. And then me, and then the fire department. So I add one more line, but to me, that book was a great mindset book. It's one of my favorites of all time. How You Make Your Bed is up there. Let me look at my bookshelf quick. It's Your Ship is another good one. I get big and geeky into the leadership books, but they're just because it's different mindsets. That's a good one to dive into if you want to see how off thinking can change a department. Just your way of thinking is a good one. Those are probably my top three. And the reason I say that is normally it takes me a month or two to read a book. And each of those I read in either 2 days or a day. So those were definitely my favorites. As far as if anybody's interested in really learning more about the mental health side of it, and and they're good with science stuff, PTSD for First Responders. It's a great book. It dives into a lot of things, and it will give you a different look at what causes it, how, why as human beings we neurologically do certain things. So that's another good one. That's my geeky side coming out. But those are probably my top books. You don't know this yet, but I just finished Kinder, and I just started One More Light. So yes, there you go. But That's one thing I've been trying to do more is get back into reading, and that kind of adds a little solace time too.
Beautiful. Brilliant. All right. Well, then what about films and or documentaries?
Films. So the All But Famous Band of Brothers, probably top film. You want to talk about teamwork, camaraderie, highs and lows, and overcoming adversity, by all means. I think all those, the Pacific, and I forget what the new one is about the pilots, but all those were good ones.
All right. Well, the next question, is there a person that you recommend to come on this podcast as a guest to speak to the first responders, military, and associated professions of the world?
Yeah. So my lead shepherd, who is Brad Savage, was on, kind of shared his story. He's a Canadian mounted police officer. He'd be a great one to come on. Kind of talks about the law enforcement side as well as some of the struggles. And then the other person I would throw in there, and against another LEO, would be Larry Turner from Save a Warrior. The dude has a powerful message, and I can't not throw him in that loop.
Beautiful. All right. Well, I know your little ones are wanting their dad back, so let me just get to the last couple. Next one, what do you do to decompress?
Anything from something as simple, like I said before, meditation works really well. And then I like backpacking. I like hiking, kayaking, fishing, basically being outdoors. Anything outdoors works really well for me. That's what my decompression stuff is.
Brilliant. And if people want to reach out to you, learn more about you, where are the best places online to do that?
I'm on Facebook. It's my name, Patrick Mullen. I do have an Instagram account. I don't really utilize it much. You're welcome to, anything through James, Save a Warrior as well. If anybody's interested in that, it's my name, patrick.mullen@saveawarrior.org is my email. So that's probably the best way, because that is an official email. But yeah.
Brilliant.
Those would be the best ways to get a hold of me.
Well, you've got a little one hanging on your arm, so I'm going to let you go. I just want to thank you so much, though, not only for being generous with your time, but also for being courageously vulnerable, because it is stories like these, especially the post-traumatic growth stories, that are definitely going to resonate with people listening. So I want to thank you so much for coming on the Behind the Shield podcast.
Thank you, James. I appreciate it. I'm glad I could be here.